So this is our second week in looking at the book of 1 Corinthians, and the question there is, who is wise and who is a fool? Who wants to guess? Yeah. Have you come across this game? Do you know what it's called? Guess Who? That's right. I actually got this one from the Salvation Army for $4. This is the knockoff one. It's called Guess Game. They just changed the name. But yeah, it's Guess Who. What are you doing, Guess Who? How do you play that? Noah, do you know how you play Guess Who? How do you play it? You want to play it? You can come and get it if you like. How do you play Guess Who? Do you know?
Work out with the clues who the chosen person is.
That's right. You've each got like a little thing there, and each person's got some people, and you've got to work out from their characteristics, guess what the other person's got. You want to take that and play with that? The ancient Greeks, and it didn't matter if they were philosophers or gossipers, they played a similar game, similar to Guess Who, and they used to call it, who is the wise man and who is the fool? And let's have a look what Paul said about that. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has God not made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save all those who believed. So the ancient Greeks played a variation of Guess Who, trying to work out who is foolish and who is wise. They'd look at someone in their society, within their orbit of influence, and they'd work out, is that person a fool or is that person wise? And you know, we all play variations of this game if we are honest with ourselves. Here's some examples. We try to work out who's wise or foolish, who's attractive or repulsive, who's ordinary or special. I've deliberately chosen some examples to create a bit of discussion. First example, Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift. Oh, come on. What do you think? Wise or fool? Foolish. Well, some people say that she's a musical genius. She has this allure with such a huge variation of people because she shares what's in her heart. She's almost like a preacher in a way, or a counsellor for people. But is she? And people say she's a musical genius. People say that she's also a master media manipulator. Say those words. She even goes as far as tries to copyright certain words, like gratitude. So every time you say the word gratitude, you have to give Taylor Swift $5. What do you think of that? That is the master manipulation going on there. Here's another one. Princess Diana of Wales. Wise, yes. She was. She had a huge influence. She was one of the first persons to publicly hug a child with AIDS, HIV, and she campaigned against landmines. She was also, though, a master media manipulator. She would complain that people took pictures of her, like sunbathing on a yacht, but she was the one that phoned them up and said, at 4 o'clock, I'm going to be on the deck of the yacht. Some people said she was even a little bit, ooh. She's not here to defend herself, so who am I to say? All right, here's one. President Trump. I knew that one would get a reaction. Is he a rich, narcissistic madman or a misunderstood political genius? I'm not going to tell you win one or another, you work it out. But it goes to show the sort of games that we play. Bill Gates, seller of inferior computer software or a generous philanthropist? Rich, yeah. But he is apparently giving a bunch of his money away. Sorry? Evil globalist. There you go. All right. Here's one. Mother Teresa. Wise, the protector of orphans and widows. Some people say she was also a regimented control freak. If you got in between her and where she wanted to go, You had to get out of the way. She'd go right through you. But we don't want that to destroy her legacy, do we? All right, here's one. Janis Joplin. No idea? Anyone know who Janis Joplin is? What songs did Janis Joplin sing?
Me and Bobby McGee.
Me and Bobby McGee. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. Do you want to sing that one for us? Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Musical genius or chaotic junkie. She was one of these people who because she died young, was she one of those people that died at 27 years old? 27. Because she died so young, we didn't get to see how well she would have done, but they say she was an absolute musical genius. But she was also a chaotic junkie. She had no discipline in life, and she just destroyed herself with drugs and etc. Wise or foolish? You choose. These are sort of examples. We make decisions and we discern the people in our lives. Are they wise? Are they foolish? They can be wise one day and foolish another, or they might just have a certain trend that goes down wise or goes down foolish. Who are the wise and who are the fools? We are always making judgments about the people in our lives. School teachers, politicians, governments, lawyers, police officers, friends, families, celebrities, kings, generals, and Christians. We make judgments. It seems to be in our nature. I guess it's a way that we can navigate the world. Can I trust this person? Are they wise? Are they a fool? If I trust them with my life or my heart, are they going to respect that? Or are they going to mistreat it? When the ancient Greeks played the game of Guess Who, they were trying to work out which is the best way to live. And there's this kind of spectrum between order and chaos. On the chaos side, there was the Epicureans. You'll hear them talked about a lot when you're talking about Paul in Greece. The Epicureans liked the lifestyle of chaos. Eat, drink, be merry. And then on the other side was the Stoics. And they said, no, life should be orderly and controlled. Work hard, live simply with simplicity. Have discipline in your life. And they're trying to work out which is the best way to live, which is the wise way to live, or which is the foolish way to live. The Epicureans would say, just enjoy yourself. Life is short. The Stoics would say, no, you've got to work hard and make your way through life. But then the Apostle Paul came to Greece, and he came to say, there's a third way between the chaos and the control. There's a third way, and it's Jesus. There's a theme, he sums it up, and as we go through Corinthians, this theme will come up a bit from time to time, and even in 1 Corinthians chapter 4:10, Paul says, I'm a fool for Christ. You can actually go and buy t-shirts. People sometimes get these t-shirts and they walk down the street. Apparently there's a guy in England who dressed up as a clown, and he had like a sandwich board, and he walked down the street saying, I'm a fool for Christ. And whose fool are you on his back? Whose fool are you? When Paul came to Corinth in about 50 AD, so about 17 years after Jesus' death, he had just been to Athens. And if you read in the book of Acts in the New Testament, Acts 17, if you've been around, you'll know this story about Paul coming to Athens and seeing all these altars and statues to pagan gods. And he came along and there was an altar, and it had an inscription that said, to the unknown God. And this is actually, they found this one was in Rome, they found this, and it's written in Latin, not in Greek, but it says there, to the unknown God. And the story of how the altar to the unknown God came to be in Athens, there's a story that David Pawson tells. He said that in ancient times there'd been an earthquake in Athens, and so the Greeks thought, well, we must have done something to upset one of our gods. But which one? How do we decide? Because they had so many of them. So they thought, we'll get a flock of sheep, and we'll let the sheep lead us to the altar of which God? So they release this flock of sheep, and the first one goes to, let's say, the altar of Mercury. a sheep goes to the altar of Mercury and stops there. So you go, okay, we've upset Mercury, right? That sheep, sacrifice to the god of Mercury. And the next sheep, who didn't learn the lesson of the first one, goes to the altar of Jupiter, stops there. Same thing happens. Gets sacrificed to the god of Jupiter. And all the other sheep, they just went and they laid down in a green pasture. I'm not sure if it was beside still waters. But there was no altar there. There was no temple there. So they said, there must be a god that we don't know about who we've upset. So they made a temple to the unknown and an altar to the unknown god. And they sacrificed the rest of the sheep on that one. So when Paul came to Athens, he said, let me tell you who the unknown God is. He is the one who made the heavens and the earth. He does not live in temples made with human hands, though he's not far from us all. And Paul went on to say, God's appointed a time and he's appointed a man who he's proved by the resurrection of his death. And they went, whoa, resurrection. People don't come back to life. They started baying for Paul's blood. If you read through Acts chapter 17, they decided that Paul was unsettling the peace by talking about resurrection from the dead. They thought, who is this fool? And they took him away to the court. And it was really by the grace of God that Paul escaped Athens with his life, because they were getting worked up. Only a fool would say that someone rises from the dead, because we know that dead people don't come back to life. There were three types of people that listened to Paul in Athens. There were those that sneered. How can you possibly say that a dead person will come back to life? There were those who wanted to hear more. Let's meet up again, you can tell us more about this. And there were some who believed and became followers of Jesus. And as we go through life, if you talk about Jesus, we will encounter all three of these people, those who sneer, those who want to hear more, and those who believe. I was once a sneerer, but God and God's people never gave up on me, and I became a believer. So Paul leaves Athens and he comes to Corinth, where he continued to preach. But he didn't try and argue with the philosophers like he had in Athens. He spoke not to the wise, but he went to those who were considered the fools in that society. And in that society in Corinth, we talked a bit about this last week, how there was a whole bunch of people who they were considered slaves. Now, they didn't get on a ship and go to Africa and steal people, like we think of the Atlantic slave trade of the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. They were people who'd been taken as prisoners of war in battles, or they'd been people who had been down on their luck and they would sell themselves into slavery for a period of time, 3, 5, 7 years, to pay off a debt or to just have board and shelter. But they were considered fools. They were the ones who hadn't been successful in life. And so they were the lowly and the downcast of that society. There were also some who'd served their terms, but they hung around. But because they'd been slaves at some stage, they were still considered lowly. They were given names. They were given a surname called Freeman, whatever the Greek equivalent of that is. So when you come across someone whose surname is Freeman, that name was probably given to a relative who was once a slave and was then freed. So Angelo Freeman, I guess, in this Greek sense. These were all the people who were regarded as fools in Corinth, as cursed by the gods. But it was these people who were humble enough to receive the gospel, to want to know more and to believe the gospel when Paul presented it to the people in Corinth. They hadn't been too proud or too arrogant to believe that there was a Messiah who had died and risen for them. Jews demand signs. Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. So there were Jews and there were non-Jews, Gentiles, Greeks in Corinth when Paul went there. And he would usually go to the synagogue first and he would preach Jesus to the Jews, and then he'd invariably get kicked out of the synagogue and then he'd turn to the Greeks. Jews require a sign because that's how God had spoken to them in the past. That's why Jesus performed so many signs and miracles before he preached the word in his earthly ministry, because the Jewish people were used to the Old Testament prophets performing signs and wonders, or God himself intervening as proof of his involvement in the world. If you want to know that God is in something that's happening, the Jews require some sort of sign. Whenever God spoke, there should be something like a plague of locusts. The sea should divide. Bread should come from heaven. Something like that should happen. But Jesus had said to them, the only sign I will give you is the sign of Jonah. I will be killed and I'll be put into the heart of the earth, just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish. And I'll be raised again on the third day. But the Jews said, no, dead people do not come back to life. That is foolish. Jews demand a sign, but Greeks look for wisdom. Greek culture was based on elevating the wise and the clever and the strong and the victorious over the poor, lowly and foolish. What they call an honour and shame culture. You're either honoured or shamed. There's no such thing as grace. There's no such thing as kindness. But Paul said, I preach Christ crucified, foolishness to Greeks and a stumbling block to Jews. And the Jews would say, no, Messiah, if you talk about a Messiah, or the Greeks would say, if you talk about this Messiah, he's got to be like an army or a general. He does not find victory in humbling himself and dying on a cross for our sin and shame. Victory comes in defeating your enemies by violent force, not by laying down your life. The gospel is foolishness to Greeks and all those who think they are intelligent and sophisticated. But to those of us who believe is the power of God and the victory over evil through Jesus' death on the cross. If a couple were having marriage problems, an Epicurean would say, just break up. Life is too short. Go and find happiness somewhere. A Stoic would say, no, you've got to make this marriage work, even if it kills you. But the Spirit of Jesus says, give up your burdens. Give them to me. I will give you a love for your partner that wells up from inside like a spring of water. It's the third way that Paul is talking about, between order and chaos, foolishness and wisdom. Well, it's foolishness of a different kind. Verses 24 and 25 say, to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. It does seem foolish. How can a death on a cross be considered a victory? Now, we often say it's because Jesus was the perfect sacrifice offered to atone for the sins of humanity and satisfy the wrath of God. And that is true. I also like the way that N.T. Wright describes it, another aspect of Jesus' death. He describes Jesus' death as a victory in this way. You know the book of Job. Job is this guy who's got everything. He's got wealth, he's got property, he's got animals, he's got a family. And Satan says to God, he will curse you to your face if you allow me to strike him. And God says, fine. First he says, just don't do what you want, just don't lay a hand on him. So Job loses all of his flocks, his children, his workers, but he doesn't curse God. And then Satan comes back and says, let me touch his body and he will curse you to your face. And God says, yeah, okay, but don't kill him. And so he inflicts Job with sores from the top of his head to the bottom of his soles. And all he can do is sit in the ashes and the dust with a piece of broken pottery and just scrape the pus. It's disgusting, isn't it? But Job never sinned with his mouth against God. Job is a representation of Christ being allowed to suffer to prove his faithfulness and his worth before God. The only difference is Jesus suffered until death. N.T. Wright describes it like this. Imagine like a fire hose full of the wrath and the evil things that the devil, our spiritual enemy, has. And he gets it like this fire hose and he just hammers Jesus, just sprays Jesus with evil and insults and pain until the hose runs dry. Now this is the hose that was meant for us, but it's applied to Jesus. And it gets to a point where the devil has nothing else to give. No more insults, no more pain, no more suffering to give. And yet Jesus lives and he says, "It is finished. I've taken upon myself the wrath of all man that was due to all mankind, that God allowed the devil to inflict me with, and it is finished." That's the victory. He endured against evil. It's quite sobering, actually. Who of us would do that for someone? I'd like to think I would, but when the time comes, and I'm not perfect either, so it will be for nothing if I did. The wise and the strong would stand there at the foot of the cross and say to Jesus, "Come on, get down from that cross. If you are who you say you are, we know that you've got the power to come down from that cross." That's what they said to him during his crucifixion, wasn't it? If you are the Son of God, come down from that cross. Come down from that cross, smite the devil and his fallen angels and the mighty men of this earth, and put them all under your feet. And Jesus says, that time will come, but it's not yet. In the wisdom of God, Jesus' body was placed in the tomb. Think of like a chrysalis. You know, the little caterpillar goes into the chrysalis and it emerges. And it's a butterfly. But it's still the same being, but it's been transformed. Think of the same way, Jesus in the tomb for 3 days, and he comes out transformed. He's still fully God, he's still fully man, but he's not the same. He's changed. He has a glorified body. It seems foolish in the eyes of people, but it's wise in the eyes of God. Verses 26 to 29. Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. I don't mean that as an insult. It's full, okay? Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. And if you look around, you'll notice that not many Christians are of noble birth, from great families. Some are. I've met plenty of Christians and Christian leaders, some of the ones who I went through training with, and I thought, these people are greater mortals than the rest of us. And I remember there was one guy who was going through ordination training with, and he had studied biomedical engineering, and he did really well out of it. And he decided to become a pastor, a preacher. I said, "You could have done anything with your life. Why did you choose to become a pastor?" He said, "Oh, it was just what God wanted me to do." He gave up the life he could have had to serve God's people. And I thought that was just amazing, to devote your life to God in that way when there's so many options available to him. Nicky Gumbel from Alpha strikes me as the same sort of person. You know, he says he comes from like a family of lawyers. His dad was a famous lawyer, Sir someone Gumbel, and he gave it all up to become a minister in the Anglican Church and run Alpha. Perhaps you've been in this situation, or you've seen someone who's given up the opportunity for a great promotion at work and said, "No, rather than spending extra hours in the office, I'd rather accept a lower level of promotion so I can spend more time at home with my family or spend more time serving God. It costs you something in prestige and probably income. But it means so much more than that, doesn't it? Well, they say not too many people have written on their headstone, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. People would normally, when at the end of their life, say, I wish I'd spent more time with my family. I wish I'd served God more. They don't say, I wish I had more money or more stuff. What seems foolish to the world is wise in God's eyes. Not that there's anything worth boasting about, because our boasting should be in the Lord. Let us boast in the Lord. Let us be thankful and joyful that God has called us to be part of his eternal family. Let's be thankful that for some reason we were willing to listen when others weren't. And thank you that we should be thankful that God took our simple and humble lives and called us to work beside God in this ministry of reconciliation, whereby God's reconciling the world to himself. Isn't that wonderful? Just got one last example to finish with here. We looked at this in week 7 in Alpha was How Does God Guide Us? One of my favourite episodes. Do you remember this story, Raymond? The story is a man was staying in a hotel, and it was a hotel where it had the rooms went around the outside, and there was a central sort of atrium sort of thing, and the bottom was a piano on the ground floor. And this man was in his hotel room, and he heard the sound of someone playing the piano, and it was terrible. And he looked and he saw this little girl sitting at the piano going plink plonk, plink plonk, plink plonk, playing absolutely awful. No idea what she's doing. And then he saw a man come and sit down beside her at the piano, and he played the notes between the notes that she was playing. He played a beautiful melody that made her plinking and plonking amount to something. And it turned out to be a beautiful noise. He later found out that the man was a famous Russian composer, and that was his daughter. And together they made something beautiful when she by herself could only bring noise. It reminds me of a song. Do you know that song? All they had to offer him was brokenness and strife, but God made something beautiful of my life. What is foolish to those outside of God's kingdom is to us God's wisdom and God's strength in us and for us. Also, that God may be glorified in this world and in our lives. Who is the wise and who is the foolish? That you be the judge. Dear God, we thank you so much for the way that you called us, the way that your kingdom is an upside-down kingdom, the way that your kingdom is one that doesn't look at the great, the mighty, the wise, the intelligent of this world, but looks at the lowly, the foolish, the humble, and makes them great in your eyes. So we thank you, Lord, that all we have to offer is just brokenness and strife. We thank you for that example of the young girl and her father who came together to make something beautiful. May our lives reflect that. In Jesus' name, amen.